Hello, time for another Man in Gray book review. Today's book is Perfect State by Brandon Sanderson. It was published in 2015 by Dragonsteel Entertainment, and it's 88 pages. In this novella, we meet King or Emperor Kai Romanus the First, who's the emperor of a kingdom called Alnornia. And he spent the last 300 years battling various opposing forces in various other countries until now, after 300 years, he's conquered everyone and he becomes emperor of the entire world with an army in the millions and a huge castle that he lives in, a huge mansion and so forth. But he's increasingly bored because now that he's conquered the world, he has no more challenges to live up to, except for one. It turns out, of course, all of this is not real. It turns out that Caiominius is not really an emperor at all, because he's actually living in a computer simulation. We learn as we go through the book that there's a group of beings called the Woad, and apparently at some point in the past they took over the Earth, but instead of wiping out humans, as you tend to expect in science fiction novels, they decide to give humans the perfect life. They create a perfect state for each individual human. So what they do is, and they do this without using up a lot of resources. So what they do is they take the brains out of human fetuses and put them in, they dispose of the body and put the brain in a nutrient bath and connect it to a computer network. And they design a computer world for that brain to live in, a world in which they are the most important person. And so in Kai's world, he's the king, he's the emperor. And even though they set it up, the computer simulation is set up so that he's challenged, but he can never really be killed. If he's injured, he can heal himself very quickly, just like in a computer game. You get another life. He never really dies, and he always wins eventually. It's kind of like a casino gambling, in a casino where the casino may lose short term, but over time they win, more than they lose. They're guaranteed to win over a long time. They never go out of business. You don't see casinos failing very often because the gambling is set for they to win over a long time. And so it's the same way. The Emperor Kai is always going to win eventually. He has to struggle, and the computer simulation is set up that way so he doesn't get bored. They don't want him to win too easily, but they don't want him to lose either. So he does that, and he realizes it. So while he's into the moment, he loves the fighting and the conquest and the women and everything, but at the same time he realizes that none of this is really real, that it's all being rigged by the Woad, and he grows to resent the Woad because they're the only ones who can actually stand up to him. And what happens is, every so often, because the body has been disposed of and it's only a brain in a nutrient bath, the people can live much longer lives than they would if they had a body. There's no heart disease, no cancer, or anything like that. But eventually, after 300 or 400 years or so, 500 years, the brain cells start dying off, and the brain dies and has to be replaced. So periodically, the Woad makes these humans, which are called live-born in this novel. The live-born people have to get together and procreate. They have to get people together and have sex, and then they remove the fertilized egg from the female and grow it in a test tube and then put it in a bath and hook it up to computers. And so the Woad is demanding that Kai, the Emperor Kai, does this, and he's kind of in a bad mood because he's feels like they're bullying him, and they give him a list of compatible women to choose from. And because he's feeling moody, he picks the woman at the bottom of the list, the one he's least likely to be compatible with. And so they meet in a neutral world, which is a kind of late 20th century big city at night where there's gangsters, and it's kind of like a Gotham City in the Batman world. And the woman, his name is Sophie, it turns out to be a radical feminist because the world she lives in is one in which she has to fight for women's equality. And so she spent the last 100 years getting women the right to vote and giving the women the right to serve in Congress and so forth. And eventually she gets all of those. But she also realizes that this is just a computer simulation, and that she hasn't really accomplished anything because it's all been rigged in her favor. And so her solution is to go rogue. She basically says, I'm not going to play by the Woad's rules anymore. And so she becomes an anarchist and starts setting off bombs and destroying things and trying to trash the whole system, trying to destroy the whole legal system that's been built up that she helped create. And so it would seem like these two people are completely incompatible. This kind of He-Man, Conan the Barbarian type, and a radical feminist. But Kai admires Sophie's determination to stick it to the Woad, because he also resents the Woad for the way they manipulated everything. And so it looks like they're going to get together and have sex, but then a third live-born person intervenes. Now, it turns out years before, the Emperor Kai ticked off another live-born. Every once in a while, the live-born can meet in a neutral world. There's kind of like parallel worlds where they're neat. And this other live-born wanted him to fight. They wanted to fight, but because Kai realized the whole thing was rigged and was meaningless, he said, I'm not going to do this. He was in bad mood, so he walks away. And this really ticks off this other live-born guy. And so he says, I'm going to get even with you. And so he spends decades trying to, and this other guy turns out to be a computer hacker. So he's able to hack into the Emperor Kai's world and mess with him. And finally, he comes up with this killer robot who breaks into this world where Sophie and Kai are at. And just as they're getting ready to do the deed, this giant killer robot shows up. And it turns out that this other live-born guy has hacked into the Woad's computer system so that this killer robot really can kill Kai. So now for the first time, Kai's faced with a battle that he's not guaranteed to win, because he could die. He could lose this battle. And Sophie's wanting him to run away to another world and escape him, but he can't turn down this opportunity. He's finally got a chance to escape the confines of this artificial world that he's living in and fight this robot, even though the robot's gigantic and he's just one guy. How's he going to do it? And so that's basically the plot of this novella. Now, it sounds like it's incredibly convoluted and difficult to follow, but Brandon Sanderson is a really good prose stylist, which is not always true of science fiction and fantasy writers. And so this book actually reads pretty easily. It's not that difficult to follow what's going on. There's a little confusion at the beginning, but by midway through the book, it's pretty clear what's going on. And there's more to it than just a science fiction / fantasy thriller. There's also a philosophical issue that comes up. Before the killer robot shows up, Kai and Sophie get into this argument or debate about these other computer simulated people, what are called machine born. There's the live born, which are human beings, brain of a human being living in a simulation. And then you've got all these simulated people, which are just computer code. And Sophie argues that these machine born people aren't real people because they're just computer simulations. You type a few buttons on a computer keyboard and you can kill them all. So she doesn't have any qualms about setting off an explosion and blowing up a building and killing hundreds of people because they're not real people anyway. And they could be recreated instantly. If the Woad wanted to, they could tap a few buttons on a computer, keystrokes, and recreate all these people from scratch. So he says, I'm not really doing any harm because these people aren't real. But the Emperor Kai says the opposite. He says, well, these people are real to me because they have personalities, they have opinions, they can talk and move, and they have some free will, as much free will as the computer programming will allow them. And he says, to me, they're real people, and so it's immoral to kill them or do something like that. So it raises the question, that as AI gets more dominant in our lives, at what point do computer software programs, AI, robots, when do those start having the rights that humans have? Because one of the things that the Emperor Kai says is that she's saying, well, they're just computer code. And he says, well, we're kind of the same way because even though we're live-born, our brains are run on chemical reactions and DNA programs them. So the DNA is like a program. The chemical reactions in our brain cause us to be who we are. How is that any different than lines of code in an AI program? So it's an interesting debate. It's one that's not resolved because, of course, the killer robot shows up. And there's a twist end at the end of it. There's a little surprise in kind of like O. Henry stories. If you're familiar with them, there's a surprise at the end. It's a really entertaining story that, again, has some philosophical aspects to it. If you've never read a Brandon Sanderson book before, this was a good one to start because Sanderson is famous for writing really long books. A lot of his fantasy novels are 800-900 pages. Some of them are trilogies or even longer. So you're making a huge commitment when you read one of Sanderson's novels because they tend to be really, really long. And some people are intimidated by giant books like that. And so if you want to kind of dip your toe into Brandon Sanderson's writing, this is less than 100 pages. It's fast moving. You get a taste of his writing style and where he's coming from. And if you're already a Brandon Sanderson fan, you'll gobble this up real quickly because it's a short book. It's really either a long short story or a short novel. It's called a novella. But again, it's less than 100 pages, so you'll gobble this up easily, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. So that's the book. The book is Perfect State. The author is Brandon Sanderson. This has been another Man in Gray book review. Thanks for watching.